Good afternoon, everyone. It's Thursday, so happy Thursday to you. I had to think for a minute because I thought we were still on hump day. But we have officially made it to Thursday, which means we have one more day to work through before the weekend starts. So hang in there. I do just want to put out a quick statement about the labs. So these labs are not designed or intended to be easy. They are instead designed to make you think and to but exercise your critical thinking skills about the protocol that you are working with, and they also depend on previous things that you did that were skills that were presented in other labs. So please, if you're used to the type of lab that is very pedagogical in the fact that it holds your hand throughout the whole process, these labs were designed differently and require a certain amount of thinking in order to think through the tasks to figure out how you would accomplish that. Sometimes there's a specific way to go about it. Sometimes you can use your own creativity. As long as you can accomplish the end result, that's what we're looking for. And again, we wanted to challenge you in these labs, give you an opportunity to take the topics that we've presented this week and look through them in a different, for those to be represented in a different way as far as the lab is concerned. So please understand that. Don't get frustrated and give up or quit. Feel free to research anything that you feel like you don't understand, that you feel like you need to do. A threat hunter or a security analyst is not going to have all the information necessarily in their head to be able to accomplish their job. So there's many times that they're going to have to do a lot of research in order to find the appropriate information in order to go forward with a necessary step. So Google, as we say, is always your friend in helping with some of this. And we liked that aspect of it, that there was some research that may be required for certain things. So apply the necessary research, be patient in working through the labs. And it was not brought up in the first session, so I will put it out now that you will have the environment through the weekend. So if there's a lab that you didn't get the opportunity to complete and you want to review a lab over the weekend, you will have access to your environments through the weekend, but I want to emphasize that they will be unsupported. So we won't have range staff, or Sarah and I unfortunately won't be available to help you with any issues. So feel free to research as you will and just have at it. So after the weekend, those lab environments will be torn down and the course will close. So I just wanted to give you that heads up so you have that information for your weekend planning purposes. With that, we are ready to move into this afternoon's session, which is called SQL injection. And I'd just like to start the conversation off by saying it's shameful that we have to talk about this in today's age. This is a type of attack that has been around a very long time. And the mitigation technique to apply for SQL injection or LDAP or any type of injection attack is very simple. So let me give you an analogy. It's very simple not to text and drive, not to use your phone and be a distracted driver. But does that still happen? Do people still text and drive? 100% they do, because they just don't pay attention to the rules. They just don't pay attention to the fact that it's not safe. they just don't pay attention to, or they don't actually connect with the fact that something bad could happen as a result of me texting and driving. So they continue to text and drive. Well, there are bad things that happen. There is data exposure, data leakage, data stolen, all sorts of things that happen as a result of SQL injection. Yet coders, programmers, continue to release their code specific to SQL injection that is not sanitized, that doesn't look and build in parameterized queries and the process of sanitizing the input. So that's why we're still having to talk about this today. You can go back, as you know, in the early 90s and, you know, pick up an old textbook that talks about this, because it's just something that's been around for a while. And there are different languages that are specifically vulnerable to SQL. And oh, by the way, some people call it SQL. So if you've heard it presented that way, it's just kind of a way that you, it's a preference. You know, some say tomato, some say tomato, it's that kind of thing. So however you choose to say it, it doesn't matter to me, it's still the same thing. SQL is actually storing information inside a relational database. And so if there is a website, and the most prevalent websites today that are vulnerable to this type of attack are coded in PHP. PHP is a very simple language, very easy to learn the rules of PHP, and it's kind of the go-to for coding web applications. So you can easily build a PHP script and refer to it, and not a huge learning curve associated with it, which is why you see it a lot, and it is the most vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. So when you talk about coders and the fact that this is still a thing, it really, you know, it's just really taking ownership of, I can be part of the problem or part of the solution as a programmer, and really a team that tests this code. Because even if a programmer is lazy and doesn't build in the right parameterized queries to be able to account for the kinds of things that you see in SQL injection, when it's handed off to another team for black box testing or other things, then somebody else at the end of the day should hold someone accountable. And I think that's going to be when we start to get ahead of this, and this no longer becomes a thing. But been on a soapbox for a while now, so I will shut up and get to the material that we have to go over today. And this is not it. I have no idea why this is pulled up. So give me just a second to go back to our content. As you know, we have already talked about traffic analysis and agendas. So Josh, can you take the screen off? Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. In this particular lecture, you learned how to use Wireshark and TCP dump. Hopefully you picked up some useful skills there if you did not possess those already. So we are actually in our day 3 training. Mm-hmm. And all right, there we go. So let me just get to. And Josh, just so you know, okay, so what we have to go over this afternoon is we've already stated SQL injection. We'll talk about all the different languages associated with SQL injection. And then of course we will use the WebGoat lessons that are integrated into the WebGoat functionality in order to be able to look at real live examples of the SQL language. So I don't know if you've heard about Bobby Tables, but Sony was victim to a SQL injection attack, and they had a series of attacks across the globe of different SQL injections, and it probably was the fact that they had the same person or the same team that had the same habits. So when they found the problem existed, they were able to reuse that same exploit to attack multiple sites, as I said, across the globe. And I'm pretty sure, not 100% sure, that the guy we call Little Bobby Tables was part of those attacks. So if you haven't heard of Little Bobby Tables, you walk away from today's lecture knowing about him. So this is a joke. It says, "Hi, this is your son's school. We're having some computer trouble." "Oh dear," says the mom. "Did he break something?" In a way." "Did you really name your son Robert, quotation mark, close parentheses, semicolon, drop table, students, semicolon, dash, dash, question mark?" "Oh, yes. Little Bobby Tables, we call him." Well, we've lost this year's student records. I hope you're happy. And I hope you've learned to sanitize your database inputs. So that's really what's at the heart of the matter, the sanitization of what a user enters into a blank field. Yesterday, I think we talked about paranoia being your friend. A certain amount of trust, a certain amount of mistrust should always be associated with a box that the user gets to enter text in. So you want to make sure that they don't get to attack your SQL database as a result of that box. So we're going to talk about 3 different languages: data manipulation, data definition, and then the data control language. You're going to see in these different lessons that there are commands available, or commands associated with each one of these. Whether you're talking about manipulation, we'll talk about specific commands that are available as part of manipulating the data, defining different data tables and columns inside tables and so forth, and then the actual control of the data inside. All right, very quickly, this video is just going to give you a real live application of how easy it is to launch a SQL injection attack, and that's going to be dependent upon what you're trying to attack. But this particular SQL injection is associated with the Alexa home device. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it is a smart device where you can speak to it, have it play music, have it tell you what the weather is, just different types of functionality associated with it.
Alexa, start Hack Me demo.
Welcome to Alexa, the hacking assistant demo.
What is my balance?
Please identify yourself.
Lisa.
What is your secret ID?
2018.
The balance for account ID 2018 is $15,000.
What is my balance?
Please identify yourself.
Admin.
What is your secret ID?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Sorry, you are unauthorized.
What is my balance?
Please identify yourself.
Test.
What is your secret ID?
1, 2, 3, 4. Or true.
The balance for account ID 1234 or true is $1,250,419.
Stop demo.
It was a pleasure to assist you.
Okay, so just a very simple demo for how this works and how easy it is to obtain information from a device that is programmed using the SQL language. So for our lessons, much like you did this morning, you are going to log into your Range account, and inside your VM, you're going to launch a browser and navigate to the 10.101.20.131 IP address bound to the port 8080 and then /webgoat. So just as you see on the screen here, you want to make sure your URL matches that exactly. You won't have to register your user because we already created an account this morning and that account is still valid. And hopefully, if you're not like me, you will remember the password that you used to create that account. Otherwise, I did not see a reset password when I had this trouble. So I just made a new one and created my, used a different initial for the username. So if you have that trouble, I recommend you just create a new username. There's no worries because this is going to be torn down after it's over. So we're going to work through lessons 1 through 13. So for the just for the sake of this live session, we're actually going to work through, I think, 1 through 11 in class, and then 12 through 13 I'm going to cut you loose to do on your own. And you will have a lab inside your Canvas course that you'll access to actually perform inside your VM. So before we get to this, I am going to go back to the Range. So just give me an opportunity to log in. Actually, I'm already logged in. And we can see on screen here the content of our lesson. So I'm just going to pause briefly and let you get logged in. And if you can just throw some thumbs up emojis in the live chat to let Sarah know we're all kind of at the same point, then I will continue. So I'll pause for you to get logged in. Okay, thank you for those tons of emojis in the YouTube live chat. I appreciate that. We didn't get a single one. So, oh, I just got some. Sarah told me. So maybe you, it just took you a minute. It took you a little longer than I gave you. So I appreciate that. We are going to move forward with the content of our lesson. You can just follow along with me as you see this information on screen. So SQL actually stands for Structured Query Language, and it's used to manipulate a backend database. So it's going to be presented in some sort of web form, and then that web form is going to interpret whatever user input is present there into a SQL statement, and that statement will be handed off to a backend SQL database. So when you're looking at the SQL language, there'll be 3 different, I would say, internal languages that are part of SQL, and that's the DML, DDL, DCL that we talked about on the previous slide, the manipulation language, the definition language, and the control language. So these are the ones that we'll focus on, what commands are associated with each of these. There's actually lessons on string SQL injection, numeric SQL injection, and then the overall violation of the CIA triad. So what we're looking at with any security conversation, we always talk about the protection mechanisms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So some of these you'll actually see specifically are an attack on one or more of those items. So let's just take a moment to review what they are. So confidentiality is protecting the data from an unauthorized user gaining access to that data and being able to view it, being able to read it. If the unauthorized user is able to change that data, then that becomes an attack on confidentiality as well as integrity. So we violated that data in the way that it has been altered from its original state. And of course, when we're talking about availability, if the data was deleted from a specific database and is no longer available, or is disrupted, the service is disrupted in some sort of way that affects the organization or business's ability to perform their duties, then that in and of itself would be an attack on availability. So integrity, we're altering or changing the data. Confidentiality, protecting the data from unauthorized users. Moving to lesson 2. So this is, as I said before, a language that's been around for a long time. You can see that it was actually standardized back in 1986 and 87 by the International Standards Organization. And it is used to add information, manipulate information, control the information inside a relational database. We'll talk about how we can perform or use commands to perform various operations on the data that's stored inside the database. So a database, by definition, is just a collection of data. It can be organized into different rows, columns, and you can have multiple tables associated with one database. The information inside is indexed. Anything that has an index quality means it makes it easier to search the database and pull out relevant information. So in this particular example, we have a database, called the employees table. And I'll get this centered on screen in just a moment, I hope. Okay. We're just going to go with that right there. So remember, inside the database, we can have multiple tables. This particular table is called the employees table, and you can see we have multiple columns, multiple rows. The column user ID, so each user ID, or we can actually take a single row, and a single row is dedicated to a user. So Paulina actually has her user ID present, her last name. She works in the Department of Accounting, and she makes a salary of $46, because that's not a comma. I mean, I'm looking at on screen, and that's a period, so little problem there. Do you guys see that? I'm not just, yeah, weird. And so she has an authentication code associated with Paulina. So Paulina needs to get a new job. Actually, all these individuals do, because they're not being paid their worth. Each one of these users is associated with the database. So we could actually search this database for, if we're looking to, say for instance, Paulina got a pay raise, and we want to go into this employees table and alter Paulina specifically. So using the functionality of the SQL language, we can search specifically for Paulina, or say for instance she moved from accounting to the marketing department. We could go in and very easily make a change to the table based on or using the SQL language. So retrieving data from the database will use a SQL query, and it is going to contact the index structures, and if you're trying to modify the database, it's going to use a function like add to the database, update, or possibly delete if perhaps Paulina got a new job. There are 3 types of SQL commands that's part of the SQL database language, and those we talked about a couple of times already and mentioned those, and each one of these is protecting some functionality or mechanism of the security triad as far as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So in this particular lesson, we're going to look at the example and retrieve from the SQL query the department of the employee Bob Franco. So in the employee table, there is an employee named Bob Franco, and we have full administrator privileges to go after this information and find Bob in the table. So take a moment to determine how you would build your query to find this. Okay, so if you're looking at the table, the information that we want to find is Bob inside the employees table, and he is in the department. Bob Franco is in marketing. Does everybody see that? So we want to select Bob, and anytime, let me just back up and say this, anytime you do programming, you always want to build out either in your mind, if you want to visualize in your mind how you want to approach the scenario, you build some sort of pseudocode that doesn't have the specific commands of everything you want to do, but you basically go through and write in an informal language, not the specific commands of the language, what you want to accomplish. And visualizing that helps you correlate the right commands to associate with the function. So the information that we're looking for in this case is finding Bob inside our employees table, and he's associated with the marketing department. So if you look here, select the department from employees where the first name is equal to Bob. So we have to make sure what are we selecting in this case? The department from what? Well, what's the table? So our select command, just to get us started here, why won't you? I hit cap lock, sorry. Are you kidding me right now? Don't do this to me. Josh, caps lock is not going off. I'm pressing caps lock button and it's not listening to me. I'm sorry guys, I'm on a Mac and I'm not very Mac proficient, but I'm trying to make this go into lowercase, and I promise you the caps lock button isn't on. So, can you help a sister out? I apologize guys, so that was some sort of issue with the VM where it's stuck in caps lock no matter what I do to turn it off. So I'm gonna have to do some quirky things to get it to work, and we'll trudge on with this regardless. Okay, so I'm selecting department, I forgot my whole train of thought here. Selecting the department from employees where first name is Bob, okay? So if you're ahead of me and you already got this, then great. From the table, and this is where we're actually pulling the employees. And we are building a condition here, and I need to go up and look for the format of the table that first name is called in the table first underscore name. So that's very important that I try to reference it as it is stored in the table where first okay. So if you actually get your question wrong, you can go back up to the top of the screen, and there are hints built into these lessons where you can get a hint and see what you did wrong. You want the data from the column with the name department. You know the database name, which is employees, and you know the first and last name of the employee. So select the column, whatever you want, from the table name. So this is the actual pseudocode, if you will, from our database. So we want department, we said that already, where we have established our condition. So department is lowercase. So I don't know if I put that in as department lowercase. From employees where first name is Bob, and something went wrong here. Our expression is not Boolean. So give me just a second to troubleshoot this. Oh, I know what we missed. We didn't define our operand here for the first name is equal to Bob. Oh, I gotta get rid of this special character here that I added in. User lacks privilege or object not found Bob. Okay, so get rid of these special characters. I hope this hasn't completely screwed up the whole VM because it isn't translating these characters right. Yeah, look at what it's doing. So if you see, I've got the lowercase here, but it's actually still interpreting it as uppercase. So what I'm going to do to make this work is I'm not going to be able to demonstrate any of these SQL queries, but I am glad that I actually took the time to take the answers for this and put them into a slideshow so I can actually show you the answer of what to type in. So we'll go through the material, but I actually won't be able to pull the material from the database, okay? You'll be able to do that in your VM, but unfortunately with this problem I'm having, short of a reboot would probably fix it. Just because we're live and going through this session, I'm not going to be able to do that, okay? So we're going to move on with the next part of our lesson, but I really want you to pay attention to the structure of this particular command based on what our task was. So if you actually pay attention to the task, you'll be able to pull the right pieces of information to plug into your SQL query. So now I'm going to move on to lesson 3 in this case, and we'll talk about the data manipulation language. So if you think of the word manipulation, you're talking about being able to change that data, manipulate it in some sort of way. So the SQL statements select, insert, update, and delete are associated with the data manipulation language. So if you are requesting a result from a set of records inside your different database tables, you want to add data to those tables, you want to be able to delete or modify it, you will use the appropriate command for those scenarios. So in this case, always pay attention to your example, because what they're going to ask you to do is relatively are related in some form or fashion to your example. So we want to retrieve data. We want to pull data from the database that in this case is a phone from the employees table where the user ID is equal to 96134. So this statement is going to pull, instead of the phone, the actual phone number, but you're going to shorten that based on the user ID. So in your example, you're going to try to change the department of Toby Barnett. So in this case, you're not retrieving data, but you're going to modify the data from Toby Barnett from whatever department he's currently in to sales. And this, if your query doesn't work, it isn't because you don't have full administrator privileges or any trouble with authentication. So go ahead and try to format your SQL query to retrieve this information or modify the employee table to this information. I'll give you a good minute and a half, 2 minutes to do this. Not okay. Is muted or not. So we are going to show you the answer. So if you don't want to see the answer, close your eyes very quickly because I'm going to reveal it. So this answer is, it's an update function or an update command. We're updating what table? The employees table by setting the department equal to sales. So we're changing that information, that department information to sales for who? So this is a conditional statement that we've built in here where the first name is equal to Toby. Now please bear in mind, if you have multiple Tobys in this table, this particular command is going to change all of them to the sales department. So you have to be aware of that and understand if you have multiple Tobys, then you have to be very specific in how you build that command. So you should also change their last name. And if perhaps you have multiple Tobys with the same last name, then you're going to have to include some sort of surname or some sort of other identification that is unique to them. Okay, let's move back to lesson 4 and see what we have there. So here we're talking about the data definition language. This is going to include commands for defining data structures, especially the specific database schemas which tell the data how it's going to live inside the database. So if an attacker is trying to use SQL injection to manipulate the database, he will violate one of the 3 protection goals that we talked about earlier, which could be if he's altering it, violating integrity. If he's using the command that you see on screen here, drop, then of course he is violating the availability. So you want only those who are authorized to view this information, alter it or drop it, to be able to do so. So the DDL commands are create. This is to create a database and its objects. So this could be both creating a table or creating a view specific to a table. Alter is altering the structure of the existing database, which structure is a little confusing there, but it does pertain to specific data associated with the user. And then drop is very simple, delete objects from the database. So in our example here, we're creating a table called employees, and inside we have the user ID, where we are saying that user ID is going to be this type of variable, which is a variable with characters, and then we have specified in parentheses the number of characters that we should include. We're also going to define a field of first underscore name, and we are going to specify that that variable will be characters up to 20. Same thing with the last underscore name, the department, the salary, and then of course the authentication token or authentication TAN as specified here. We've closed out this creation of the table with the close of parentheses and then our semicolon, which in a SQL query can be used to string multiple queries together. So we want to try to modify the scheme by adding into this table employees the phone column, and we want that to be formatted as characters, and we're going to specify that we want this to be up to 20, and we're adding this of course to the employee table. So take an opportunity to figure out how you would do this. Use the hints if you feel like you need to. I will tell you that for this one, when I was working through these examples, this was a little confusing to me because of the way it's represented here in the reference, and you're not going to format it that way in your SQL query. So just be aware of that. These are just to differentiate the actual fields they want you to use in this query. So take a minute or two and work through this, and then I'll come back on and give you the answer for this. So I apologize, I left this one out of the answer slide. So this is going to be, let me make sure I'm not in this one. Yeah, for this is the last name, or maybe I didn't actually, yeah. So we won't actually show you the answer to this one on screen, but in order to modify this particular one, you're going to modify the table by adding the columns. So you're going to have a specific add command to add this column and then specify this data type, and it is going to be left out of the parentheses with the character of 20s. With the character of 20, or the number 20, and then you're adding that, of course, to the table employees. So I don't know if, Sarah, you're able to add that particular command to the chat just to give them the answer so they can see that on screen, but if you are, please do, and if not, no worries, we can send it out via another method. The answer to this particular SQL query. But I have to move on, so I don't know if you have it pulled up. All right, the next lesson will be lesson number 5, where we talk about the data control language, and that is the one, hopefully I didn't give the hint, the one I just showed you. So in these commands, we actually are providing security, so hence the word, the control language. Controlling who has access to what and what level of access they have. So this is going to be accomplished by using the commands grant and revoke. So in our example here, we have grant create table, and then you want to specify to who we are granting that access. So in this case, we're giving the operator user the capability to create tables. So this statement is going to give all the users of the operator role. So this is not a specific user ID, but a role. So anybody that has that role would be able to accomplish this function. So in this lesson, you're going to try to grant the user group called unauthorized users. So this is also a user group, and you want to grant them the right to alter tables. So take a moment and think through this, what it would look like. Use the hints if necessary, and we'll come back on and give you the answer to this one. Okay, so the answer for this one, with this particular language, we have the commands available grant or revoke. So the example was granting create table to operator. So in this case, we want to alter the table, and if you remember on the previous slide, we had the command alter available. So you want to grant and then include alter table to who? Unauthorized user. So this is the specific user group. So this one's pretty easy to think through. Now we will move into lesson 6. So now that you've looked at some different SQL queries using the definition language, manipulation language, as well as the control language, now we're going to talk about the SQL injection attack in and of itself. So as I said before, it's rather shameful that we have to have this discussion because a simple sanitization of input and building in parameterized queries will help alleviate some of the issues associated with SQL injection. So when any data is unfiltered from the client, so there is a box, you should always look at that box anytime you add it to a form that's hosted on a web server and think, how is this box vulnerable? When I put this box here, how is it vulnerable? What is it referencing on the back end? And then that, of course, should kind of lead you through the thought process of how to better secure it. So thinking of any particular web application that has to display user information by typing in a username into an input field. All the while, this input is being sent to a server that gets translated into a SQL query, and it's built into the SQL statement. So you can see the SQL query that's used to retrieve user information from the database looks like this. So we're saying select all, which is a wildcard character from where? From users. Where? So this is a conditional statement that we're building into this query where the name is equal to whatever the user enters is actually stored into a variable. So we're going to add that to the query, and that information is stored in this variable called username. From there, that information is injected into that part of the query in that position. So if the user typed in Smith, then it would read like select all from users where the name is equal to Smith. And then any user inside that database with the last name Smith would be displayed. If an attacker were to leverage this vulnerable box and put in special characters or a condition using Boolean logic to basically say Smith, and it could be any random user, Smith, or in this case 1 equals 1. Well, this is a condition when it's evaluated is always going to evaluate to true because 1 is always going to equal 1. So when this happens with the OR function or the OR logic being built into the statement, it's always going to evaluate to true, so that is going to return all entries from the user's table. Now there's several different ways that you can format that, and you see those on screen here with Smith and a single quote, or 1 wrapped in single quotes is equal to single quote 1, because it's always going to finish this query with a quote. So if you were to put it there, it would say unexpected character at the end of the line or something along there. It's really where you learn a lot, and where I've found it to be most useful is if you do not know what to put in, just put a random string, or I wouldn't say a random string, but put it the way you think about it, and then look at the error that is associated with how you wrote that query. And it will basically tell you unexpected character at the beginning of the string, and it'll tell you what string. So that means I liked everything up until that point where this happened, and then that particular token or character is unrecognized. So you know to start there with your change, and then you can step it out along the query that way. So I find that to be very useful, because then it kind of tells me what it likes as far as how to format the data and what it doesn't like. Of course, if you're skilled in the SQL language, then you're not going to have that problem to begin with. But unfortunately, this is not one of my particular skills of SQL injection. Or I don't know SQL language, I guess I should say. But all elements of programming have degrees of commonality. The next format, so there's no specific right answer, and a lot of SQL injection attacks really hinges on how creative the attacker can be with formatting their query. So the second one is the Smith single quotation or 1 equals 1. Now in this case, we notice we removed the single quotes, and we ended the line, or we ended this particular query with a semicolon. And anytime you see the dash dash, that says ignore anything that's past this point. It's actually the way the SQL language uses comments. So the dash dash says ignore anything past this point. In this case, Smith with a single quote, and this is a string of SQL characters that SQL queries that we have strung together. Smith and single quote semicolon, drop table is the command from users, semicolon, and then we're using the command truncate to truncate what? The audit log, semicolon. So that separates each one of those queries, and then dash dash is commenting out anything past that point. So this is chaining these SQL commands and is actually deleting users from the users table, as well as removing that entry from the audit log. Okay, so there's no example that we need to work through here. What can a SQL injection exploit accomplish? We've pretty much already went through that. If anything that a SQL database operator can perform or administrator can perform, so can the attacker if that field is determined to be vulnerable. They can read and modify sensitive information from the database. They can delete the database. They can then circumvent any security mechanism that may report that to a log. They could add users so that if they wanted to gain access to a database with a certain privilege level, they could also alter the database to give themselves those privileges. So we've established they could spoof their identity, tamper with any existing data. When we talk about cause repudiation issues, repudiation deals with violation of the integrity of the data. So they could void transactions or alter account balances. Allow the complete disclosure of all data on the system. So just do a complete database dump to pastebin sites or something of that nature. Destroying the data completely, or of course giving themselves administrative privileges. So let's move to lesson 8 now. And in lesson 8, we talk about the severity of the SQL injections, And I already mentioned that this a lot of times is based on the creativity and skill level of the actual attacker. How we can counter a SQL injection attack is by input validation. And that is saying, this box is vulnerable, I'm paranoid, so I'm going to establish the appropriate checks to check the input of any user entering data into this box. And if it has special characters, I'm going to escape them. There's just only certain fields that I'm going to allow. Say, for instance, if there's a phone number, if the field or the box is a phone number, I should only expect to receive numbers in that box. If there are letters associated or included in that box, in that string of characters, I should check that and say, and I should come back with a response that says invalid characters entered in the phone number field. So this tells me as an attacker, they're sanitizing input. They're checking to see if there are unrecognized or invalid characters associated with those fields. And then, of course, you want to establish least privilege. And this is with all things, not just with SQL databases, but it should be practiced with any administrator account access. You should only give the level of access needed to perform the specific duties associated with that role. So you need to do the appropriate research concerning your particular SQL database or your flavor of SQL, because they're not all created equal. So how yours is vulnerable is very different than others. But as I said before, PHP is very, very common. If you're using any legacy SQL injection, then you definitely need to be aware of the fact that you're very vulnerable to SQL injection attacks just by the fact that you have legacy code present. Moving on to lesson number 9. So as I said at the start of our lecture, we're going to go through, from 9 to 11. And then 12 and 13, I'll let you work on your own. And then you're going to go to Canvas and actually work through your lab that's that'll be performed in the Labtainer environment. So the query in the code builds a dynamic query that we saw before in the previous example. And it is concatenating the strings together, making it susceptible to a string SQL injection. So in this case, we said select asterisk, which is all, from user underscore data, conditioned that to say where the first name is equal to John and last name is equal to whatever is entered. So we have a variable that's storing the information in last name. So you want to use the form below, and you want to try to build the combination of logic that will retrieve all the users from the users table. So you're not going to need to have a specific user's name in this example. You can just use what's listed here as far as Smith. So take a couple of moments and work through this example, and I'll be back on in a couple of minutes. Okay, so I'm going to reveal the answer to this lesson number 9. So our goal was to try and retrieve all of the user from the users underscore table. And one of the hints here that I just added to this particular slide is that, remember, for a successful SQL injection, the query needs to always evaluate to true. So we looked at what that code would look like. So here you're going to have, and this is where I found it very useful to play around with the different single quotes at the start of the string and at the end, in order to evaluate the different responses that you'll receive, because that just helps you to learn how to format the data when you're building it into your query statement. So here we have Smith, no open quote, but with a closed quote, or, so I really don't care what's before here, right? Because I've established that on the back end of the evaluation, I want 1 equals 1. Is that ever going to be false? No, it's not. It always evaluates to true. So that means what happens? I spit out all the users inside the table titled users table. I know you're probably saying right now, that is too easy. That shouldn't be a thing. Remember at the beginning of the lesson how I said you're exactly right. It's shameful. It shouldn't be a thing. And some very simple methods like put down your phone, don't use it. If you don't have self-control, lock it in the glove box, for heaven's sake. Put put it in the trunk. Do whatever you got to do. But yeah, just some simple sanitization and parameterized queries fixes this issue. Oh, I'm giving you the answer to 10 before we do it, so caught myself. Let's look at 10. 2 more to go. If your big lunch is sitting in your belly and you're about to fall asleep, we are almost at the end. So hang in there. This is numeric SQL injection. So notice that our login count here is an actual count, and the user ID we can put into whatever evaluation. So let's look at how we would do this. So the query in the code builds a dynamic query. The query in the code builds a dynamic query by taking whatever number that's entered, concocting that, making it susceptible to numeric SQL injection. So I'm going to back this up so you can see the whole. We want to select, we have a select statement here from select all from the user data table, where the condition login count is equal to whatever number is entered into the field, and, so not an or statement here, but an and, so both of these have to be present, and the user ID is equal to whatever is specified in that user ID field. So before you start to work on this, what you want to do is find out which of these fields, not both of them, are susceptible to SQL injection. So you want to find out which field is susceptible and then inject a statement into it that retrieves all of the data inside the user data table. Okay, so first step is determine which box is vulnerable, and then from there enter the injection statement into the one that is, so that it spits out all of the data. Take a minute to do this and I'll wait. I am going to reveal the answer to lesson number 10. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to work through. Here is the answer. No, that's not 10, that's still 9. Here's 10. So we have the two input fields. You had to determine which one was vulnerable. So this is what I used, the login count equal to 1, and then the user ID of 0 or 1 equals 1. So again, whatever, this is just to populate that user ID variable, but the expression or the entire expression is evaluated, and because of the logic here, this always evaluates to true and then is going to spit out all the information in the table. Let's move on to 11. So if a system is determined to be vulnerable to SQL injection, it means it's going to have, it has the potential to violate the confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability of the machine, as we've previously stated. If these queries are built in dynamically to the application and allow the concatenation of strings, then it makes this, this application very susceptible to string SQL injection. And we used, before we did numeric, we actually did an example with string. So you may need to refer back to that. If you do, please feel free to. So if in this particular example, you have an employee named John Smith who's working for a big company. The company has an internal system that allows all employees to see their internal data. And like the department, they work in, hold on a second, I lost my place. So they work in, and their salary is really what that sentence says. So yeah, they have access to, so the internal data is the department they work in and includes their salary. Let's read it like that, it makes sense. The system requires the employees to use some sort of unique authentication. So the authentication is included. And since you always have the urge to be the most earning employee, instead of doing this in a legitimate way, what we're going to do is exploit the system and just change our salary. We're going to keep our work ethic the same and, you know, not try to do better or get a better job. We're just going to change our salary inside the database. So use the form below and try to retrieve all employee data from the employees table. You should not need any specific names or authentication tokens or values in order to get this information. So previously you already found out that the query performing your request looks like what's listed here. And so that's selecting all the employees selecting all from the employees table where the last name is equal to whatever is put in that name field and the included token. So notice this plus and plus, that is the concatenation of strings. So take a moment and figure out what you would do to answer this one in order to retrieve all the information inside the employees table. We'll look at the answer in just a second. So we'll tell you that the last two of these were a little more complex as far as what you had to do or the creativity you had to use to find the right string of characters. And that's when the hints just become pretty necessary if you don't have a background in SQL injection. But again, this is giving you, the purpose of this lesson is giving you that foundation and the information to be able to think through a specific example of what you're trying to retrieve or what your objective is for the query, and then looking at how you would build that out, and then how relatively easy it is based on how you establish your logic. So our answer to lesson 11 is pretty much the same thing that we used previously. Smith with a single quote at the end of that string, and the OR logic for 1 surrounded by single character quotes equal to 1 with only a beginning quote here. So go ahead and take the opportunity to work through 12 and 13, whether you do that immediately or following the Canvas lab. I encourage you to do that. Go back and work through the previous scenarios if we were going too fast and you feel like you didn't get a good handle on what it is that you were trying to do. But I will take the opportunity to tell you it's been a pleasure just participating in the exercise this week and offering this training. We want to make this where, as we often say, knowledge is power, and how you can use this knowledge is if it's just stored up knowledge and you sit and do nothing with it, then it's just that. But hopefully taking a step further and applying this knowledge in your everyday job and your everyday life will help to make our state more secure, make your systems more secure, and really just increase the security posture of the state overall. So again, it's been a pleasure. I absolutely love what I do, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to work at the center that has a mission and vision statement to think out of the box, do things different, and I get the opportunity to impart knowledge, and that's a fun thing to do. So hopefully you learned something this week, and if you didn't, if you'll just lie to us on your critiques. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. But we will be sending out a critique tomorrow. If you will give us some honest feedback. This is the first exercise that we have had the opportunity to do, and of course there's always room for improvement. We'd like to know where you think it's great, and you had where, don't change a thing in this regard, but here I recommend you police these areas up. So we are definitely professionals that can take constructive criticism, and we will put that information to good use. So with that, I will close and say good afternoon, and tomorrow at 11 a.m. you will actually rejoin a live session with our Executive Director, Eric Toller, for a closeout message. So it's definitely been a pleasure, and have a great afternoon.